What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be talking about some Dynasty Sells. If you missed our last video, we were talking about players that I am buying in Dynasty Fantasy Football this offseason. So, of course, today we are going to be talking about who I am selling this offseason. And keep in mind, just because I am selling these players does not mean that I think that these players are bad, nor does it mean that I hate these players. I'm sure there's going to be comments in here, especially with some of the names that I got for you today, that people are going to be like, you hate this guy, you're tripping, blah, 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 blah. It is what it is, guys. It just means that I think that the value is at an all-time high. The value is too good to not capitalize on. And without wasting any more time, let's hop right into this video and let's talk about who I am selling first. Now, the first player that I'm going to be selling in my Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues is going to be Nico Collins, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. And the thing about Nico Collins is he's currently being ranked as the wide receiver 13 overall over on Keep Trade Cut, which, if you aren't familiar with Keep Trade Cut, it is a community-based ranking website. They basically ask you a set of questions, and that is how they formulate their data, but it does show us a little bit of a market trend on how players are rising and falling. Now, I do think that Nico has been pumped up due to a good 2023 season, obviously a very good back half of the season, and then he showed out in the NFL playoffs, which obviously is fresh on our minds. And although I don't really take this into major consideration, it is worth noting that Nico Collins is going to be entering the last year of his rookie deal going into the 2024 season, so this is a contract year for Nico Collins. Now, obviously, like I said, he's being valued as the wide receiver 13, but I think that's too high because I do think that the Houston Texans are going to be a team that is going to be in the market for adding another wide receiver later this offseason, whether that's going to be a free agent wide receiver, because we do have a good free agent wide receiver class, or whether that's going to be a rookie is something that still needs to be determined, because keep in mind, this rookie wide receiver class is one of the better ones we've had in a couple years. And now I know some people are going to debate whether that is a situation that actually happens or not. So whether you believe that Nico Collins is going to get some added competition is up to you. But one thing that we can't debate is that in games with Tank Dell in the lineup this year, they played in 12 games together. In those games, Nico Collins only finished as a top 12 wide receiver for fantasy football 3 times out of those 12 games. So that is a 25% hit rate on him actually performing at where he is currently being valued in the Dynasty community. And obviously, Nico Collins played well all year. I'm not saying that he played poorly, but it is worth noting that there was a significant increase in volume and a significant increase in the production once Tank Dell was out of the lineup. And then obviously, because of this, this has been something that has pushed his value up now where he is sitting as the wide receiver 13. And that's just something that I think is too high. So because of that, I am going to be selling Nico Collins, and he's currently being valued in a tier of good wide receivers. And a couple of these wide receivers that are being valued adjacently to him are going to be Brandon Ayuk, Zay Flowers, Devontae Smith. All of those wide receivers I think have just as high of a ceiling as Nico Collins, but I also think they have a lot higher of a floor, so there is less risk in all of those wide receivers. And again, keep in mind, I'm not saying Nico Collins is a bad wide receiver. I'm just saying he's overvalued, so we should be selling him on our teams right now. Now, moving on to my next player that I'm selling, it is going to be at the quarterback position. We are going to be talking about Jared Goff, the quarterback for the Detroit Lions. And look, I think we know what Jared Goff is for fantasy football purposes up to this point in his career. This is a guy who has the ability to be a high-end quarterback too for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, and a guy who's probably going to throw for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, all while averaging somewhere between 16 and 18 fantasy points per game. So with that being said, that is a good asset to have on your roster, but I think we could all agree that that is not a difference-making piece for your Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters either. Now, when we look across the Dynasty landscape, the reason why I'm selling Jared Goff is because I think you can get similar production to what he is currently giving you here as a high-end quarterback too, but I think you can get it at a much cheaper price. There are players in mind that I had, a couple of them that are going to feel a little bit more gross than Jared Goff. They're not going to feel as good as owning Jared Goff and having him on your Dynasty rosters, but going and getting a guy like Kirk Cousins, maybe a guy like Russell Wilson, depending on where he lands, or even maybe a guy like Baker Mayfield, feel like I am getting similar production out of them at a much cheaper price. And I think partially the reason behind this is the perception, the public perception of what the Detroit Lions are is obviously a lot higher right now with the playoff run that they just went on, and obviously with how the media has been talking about them. So I think because of that, Jared Goff's price has increased a little bit because of that positive media that they've been getting. Now, just like I mentioned with Nico Collins, Jared Goff is entering the last year of his deal here in 2024, but I do think that his deal holds a little bit more weight than what I had mentioned with Nico Collins. And the reason is because the Detroit Lions right now on paper have a lot of cap space, but they also have a lot of people who are going to be needing extensions over the next couple of years. Those being Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, Taylor Decker, Jerry Jacobs. A couple of these guys are all going to be getting extensions over the next couple of years. And with Jared Goff also needing an extension, and with Spotrac over there giving him an estimated market value of somewhere around $37.4 million, you do have to kind of look at the situation and say, okay, maybe they don't have as much cap as they actually do on paper because they are going to have to use some of that in the future. And I don't know if Jared Goff is going to be in the future plans, even though he has played well. Obviously, a lot of that extension and the numbers of that extension are going to have to be played out here in the next season and just see how Jared Goff continues to progress. But I think one thing that is going to make me pump the brakes on this Lions offense a little bit, and this is assuming that it actually happens, but it is rumored that Ben Johnson is likely going to end up as a head coach here this offseason. He's being visited by the Washington Commanders. There is still that Seattle Seahawks opening, and I do think that Ben Johnson has been one of the better offensive coordinators for the past couple of years, and it has showed in the talent of Jared Goff because his production has increased ever since Ben Johnson has been calling the plays. I think losing Ben Johnson could be a pretty negative thing for Jared Goff, depending on who comes in and fills that offensive coordinator role in Detroit. But I do think if I could move Jared Goff for a mid-first round pick or maybe another player in that similar category, or even just down tier Jared Goff to a guy like I had mentioned before and get a little bit thrown in on top, I think that's probably a roster move that I'm going to be making this offseason, and that's why I'm classifying Jared Goff as a sell on my Dynasty rosters. Now, coming in as my third sell of this video, it is going to be David Njoku, tight end for the Cleveland Browns. And the reason why I'm selling David Njoku right now is because I think when we look back at 2023, and obviously David Njoku had a good 2023 season, it's hard to really look at what has happened on the field and see what is really real. And I mean that because when I look at what they did this year, they didn't have a lot of Deshaun Watson, who obviously has been the plan at the quarterback position for this team. They also obviously didn't have Nick Chubb for the majority of the year, who is also a big piece of this offense. So you look at it and it's like, is it a lost year? I don't know if we can view it like that because they did make the playoffs, but it's definitely a year where I think it's going to be harder to look at and project this as the future of the Cleveland Browns moving forward. Now, obviously, like I said, David Njoku had a very good 2023 season. He had a massive target share in 2023, and I think that's where we've seen a lot of the value increase for David Njoku. He finished top 5 in targets at the tight end position. He was also top 5 in receptions at the tight end position, and those are obviously numbers that we want to see out of our tight ends in fantasy football. Now, on paper, that all looks good. It all looks fine and dandy, but when you dig deeper into the actual targets and where they came from, you see a massive difference in David Njoku's year, depending on who was playing the quarterback position. And when we look at what was happening when Deshaun Watson was the quarterback of this team, David Njoku was averaging 5.2 targets per game with Watson under center, and that put him on pace for 88.4 targets over a 17-game pace. Now, when Deshaun Watson was not playing quarterback, and when it was the other quarterbacks under center for the Cleveland Browns, David Njoku was averaging 9 targets per game, obviously a significant increase from that 5.2 with Watson at the quarterback position, and that put him on pace for 153 targets over that same 17-game pace. Now, obviously, there are two very different scenarios here for David Njoku with Deshaun Watson under center and with these other quarterbacks under center, and the reality of the situation is it probably ends up landing somewhere in between them if Watson is there for the entire season and he's playing healthy. But I do think that we are in a unique situation right now where David Njoku overperformed based on the circumstances of the Cleveland Browns, and we do have the opportunity to sell high on David Njoku, assuming we find the right buyer. And what I would be looking to do with David Njoku is I want to tier up. There is a tier of tight ends that are being valued just above where David Njoku is at right now. Those tight ends being Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, and Dalton Kincaid. And if I can throw a little bit on top of my David Njoku and tier up into that tier of tight ends, that is definitely a move that I'm making. And I think one of the most interesting things about it is that all of those assets are either younger or similar age to David Njoku. As young as David Njoku feels, he's really not that young at all. And just based on the overperformance in 2023, if somebody doesn't want to look as deep into the numbers as we do here, that's probably the person that I'm trying to sell David Njoku to and tier up into that other tight end. Now, moving on to my next sell high, I I'm going to catch a lot of slack for this one, guys. I can already see you run into the comment section, but before you run to the comment section, please just hear out my argument. It is going to be Christian McCaffrey for the San Francisco 49ers, and I know I feel pretty gross putting Christian McCaffrey on this sell list based on what he did for us and our fantasy football teams here in 2023. But look, man, this is a running back who has a lot of mileage on the legs. This is a guy who's taken a lot of hits, and we also need to account for the running back age cliff. This is something that happens to all running backs, no matter how much we love them, no matter how much they do for our fantasy football teams. It is inevitable. It is something that happens every single time. And I think when we have a player as good as Christian McCaffrey, it is easy to forget about that age cliff, and it's easy to kind of push it to the side and say, well, that's not going to happen to him this year. But the worst thing about the running back age cliff is it always catches us when we aren't thinking about it. And I think that's the worst thing about the running back age cliff. I mean, just think about it. 6 months ago, we were all talking so highly about Austin Eckler. We loved Austin Eckler. We were taking him running back 6 in our Dynasty Fantasy Football startups. And then this year happened, and it looks like the running back age cliff has taken Austin Eckler. And now think about where Austin Eckler is being valued in the Dynasty Fantasy Football community. And again, I want to put the disclaimer out there. I do not hate Christian McCaffrey. I do not think he's a bad player. In fact, he's one of the best fantasy football players we have had on our Dynasty rosters here in 2023. But I do think it is the smart decision to get out from a player like Christian McCaffrey a little bit early rather than holding them a little bit too late and not getting the value that we could out of an asset like this. And I want to reference an article that Ryan Heath put together over on Fantasy Points. It is a very good article, and there's a lot of good data in there. It will be linked in the description for you guys. But what he does in this article is he references the impact of age on fantasy football production. And there is a couple things here about the running back position that I want to reference. He says here that running back primes are typically from years 2 to 6 of their NFL career. And when we typically start seeing the regression of these fantasy football running backs, that is usually during the years 7 and 8 of their NFL careers, where we eventually do see that cliff or that fall off in the production, that significant dip over year 9 and beyond for those fantasy football running backs. And yes, I understand that CMC is not your average running back, so there is a chance that he's pushing this age cliff back a little bit differently. He does do a lot in the receiving game, which obviously helps him as well, but so did Austin Eckler. And like I said, even though he's not your average running back, this is a running back who is going to be headed into year 8 of his NFL career, typically when we do start seeing those regressions in the production, and it is a guy who is going to be 28 years old. So like I said, even if Christian McCaffrey can push that age cliff back a year or two, it is an asset that while we are currently valuing him where we are in the community, and keep in mind, he's being valued very highly, and rightfully so, but he is currently in the same tier of running backs like Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, those young stud running backs, where Christian McCaffrey is also the stud of the studs, but he is a lot older than those guys as well. And if I could trade him a year early and tier into one of those running backs, I think I'm doing that 100 out of 100 times, and it's just something that's not going to feel good now, but a year or two from now, you're going to feel a lot better about that move than you do today. And it's probably the move where you can recoup and gain the most value out of this asset in Christian McCaffrey. Because the alternative with CMC is that you hold him another year and he has a year like Austin Eckler had this year, which we don't know if that's going to happen. It is in the range of outcomes, but if that happens, you're going to wish you had sold CMC this offseason. And what I'm telling you here is, yes, Christian McCaffrey is awesome. No, I don't hate him, but I'm not taking the risk in letting this asset depreciate in value that significantly if he does go out and get hit by that running back age cliff. And even if you didn't want to move him for another running back, there are assets that he is being valued adjacently to, like AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, and even Kyler Murray, where if you wanted to move over to one of those assets, maybe you have to throw a piece in on top or do something to get the deal done. Those assets are going to hold their value longer than a guy like Christian McCaffrey. And I do think relatively, as far as the production goes, you will get similar production out of some of these assets. It just may not be as fun or as much this year as Christian McCaffrey can give you. And so, yeah, that hurt, man. Yeah, that was, it's tough to hear. It's tough to say, but it is something I am considering. And that's why I would say that Christian McCaffrey is a sell this offseason for me. And now moving on to my 5th and final sell of this video, it is going to be Alvin Kamara, running back for the New Orleans Saints. And Kamara is going to be going into the 8th year of his NFL career. He's going to be 29 years old. And we just obviously talked about in depth the running back age cliff with Christian McCaffrey. Well, this is another guy that running back age cliff is going to apply to. But the thing about Alvin Kamara is I do feel like we've already seen the regression kind of hit Alvin Kamara, especially when we're referring to his rushing efficiency, and especially when we look at those metrics over the last couple of seasons for Alvin Kamara. But I think a majority of the regression has went unnoticed for Alvin Kamara because of the massive workload that he's been seeing in that receiving game. In 2023, Alvin Kamara was top 10 in opportunity share, but there are definitely some things to be worried about when it comes to Alvin Kamara, and I think one of the biggest ones being that Alvin Kamara has the largest cap hit of all NFL running backs in 2024, and the Saints are not in a good cap space situation. They may be forced to move on from him. He may become a cap casualty, and if that happens and he's out of this situation where they are force feeding him a lot of targets, a lot of opportunity, there is a lot of unknown with Alvin Kamara. And to give you an idea of what I would think about that is kind of like how Dalvin Cook left the Minnesota Vikings. They cut him, he had that opportunity, and then we kind of looked around the league and everybody was like, do we really want to bring in Dalvin Cook? I'm not sure. And when he did get the opportunity, it really wasn't anything for fantasy football. So I do think that Alvin Kamara could be a cap casualty. And if that does happen, there is a good chance that he becomes pretty unreliable for fantasy football just based on how the NFL landscape is. And again, I said the Saints are in pretty bad shape as far as cap space goes. Just to give you an idea, they're negative $82 million in the hole right now. They have to come up with $82 million. It is tough sledding for the Saints over in New Orleans. And yes, I'm telling you to sell Alvin Kamara. This may not be the prime sell high window. I think that sell high window for Alvin Kamara has come and gone, but I do think that his good performance in 2023, fresh on the minds of fantasy football managers, may be just that last chance that we get to sell a little bit high on Alvin Kamara. And if I can do that right now and re-roll those dice somewhere else, that's definitely something that I'm considering on my fantasy football rosters. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and it does let me know that you guys are truly enjoying these videos. And again, if you disagree with me, man, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. I'm sure I'm going to catch a lot of heat for Christian McCaffrey, but hopefully you heard the argument and you at least heard where I was coming from on that one. Feel free to bookmark it, bring it back up a year from now and tell me how right or how wrong I was when it comes down to it. And hey, also, if you guys like this type of content, go ahead and do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and also make sure you're hitting that notification bell. That way you never miss any of these videos when they do come out. There's a lot more Dynasty Fantasy Football content coming out from the League FFB later this offseason, so we will keep giving you guys what you want and what you need to be successful in 2024 and beyond. And last but not least, make sure you guys go ahead and join that Discord. There is a free Discord link in the description, and like I said, it's free to join. We're in there talking trades, doing rookie mocks, doing all of that stuff over there in our free Discord, so there is no risk in joining that. And with all of that out of the way, I will see you guys on our next video, but until then, peace out.